In the wake of Napoleon's defeat, Europe is left deeply disorganized after nearly a quarter of a century of revolution and war. Under the leadership of the four great victors over France, the United Kingdom, after nearly a quarter of a century of revolution and war. Under the leadership of the four great victors over France, the United Kingdom, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, the European countries meet in Vienna to determine the fate of the territories that were shattered by the Napoleonic conquests and reconstruct a European order. Two principles dominate the negotiations: the preservation of political equilibrium among the powers and the restoration of old dynasties, driven out by the revolutionary wave. The decisions taken in Vienna redraw the political map of Europe. Prussia expands to include a part of the Grand Duchy of Warsaw, Swedish Pomerania, over half of Saxony, and above all, the greater part of the Rhineland. With these acquisitions, Prussia definitively obtains the status of a great European power. Russia secures its takeover of Finland. It is granted trusteeship over the greater part of Poland and removes Bessarabia from the Ottoman Empire. The Tsar thereby continues his march towards Constantinople. Austria, for its part, recovers the Tyrol and receives the kingdom of Venetian Lombardy, as well as Dalmatia. These latter territorial expansions give the Habsburg Empire a southern and Mediterranean engagement. The United Kingdom has no territorial claims on the European continent. More concerned with developing its colonial empire and ensuring the security of its commercial shipping lanes, it obtains a certain number of islands, such as the islet of Helgoland in the North Sea, as well as Malta, and the Ionian Islands in the Mediterranean. Sweden sees its annexation of Norway confirmed at the expense of Denmark, which, in compensation, receives the duchies of Holstein and Lauenburg. France, a defeated power, regains approximately its borders of 1792. To curb its territorial ambitions, two buffer states are reinforced at its borders. In the north, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, which includes Belgium, is created, whereas in the south, the Kingdom of Piedmont-Sardinia recovers Savoy, the county of Nice, and expands to include the region of Genoa. Finally, the decisions taken at the Congress of Vienna leave the Italian peninsula, as well as Germany, partitioned, in spite of the creation of the German Confederation. The new European order, drawn up in Vienna, marks the revenge of the Ancien Régime against the ideals of liberty resulting from the French Revolution, and fails to meet national aspirations that are growing in Europe. Numerous peoples are left greatly disappointed. The Poles, whose country is once again wiped off the map. The Belgians and Norwegians subjected to foreign rule. Italian and German patriots who aspire to some form of national unity. In the Balkans, the weakening of the Ottoman Empire sustains the desire for independence among Christian peoples. Serbs, Greeks, Bulgars, Romanians.
Okay, now let's continue. I just wanted to show you how was distributed or reorganized Europe after Napoleon's era. Okay, now let's go back and okay. So this is the map and how it was after Napoleon's. He was sent to an island to die. Then after the Congress of Vienna, it was reorganized the whole European map. It was like this, okay? Prussia, Russia, Austrian Empire. Okay, now let's move on. Now, after revolution in France and after Napoleon's movement, there still were some movements, some revolts in that area in France. So in this Congress of Vienna, they restore all European monarchies again. They put everything back how it was at the beginning. So royal families returned to power in Spain, Portugal, and the Italian states. In France, Louis XVIII took the throne, putting the Bourbon family back in power. The new king, however, did have to accept a constitution that left some of the reform of the French Revolution in place. Okay, now let's move on to Latin American independence. Inspired by revolutionary ideas in Europe, Latin American colonies began to win their independence. European power had ruled Latin America for 300 years. 300 años desde que Cristóbal Colón llegó y dice que descubrió América en 1492. Un momentito. Sorry guys. The people living in these colonies now wanted to control their own affairs. Todos queríamos controlar nuestros propios asuntos y no que los españoles estén controlando y robándonos y explotándonos. So in 1800s, they launched a series of revolts to throw off European rules. Now, Haití fue el primer país que logró su independencia. A partir de ahí comenzaron a caer, a independizarse muchos países. Okay. Haiti, Caribbean islands under French rule, was the first colony in Latin America to gain independence. In the 1790s, Toussaint Louverture himself a free slave led a rebellion to the Iceland African slaves. Although Napoleon sent an army to retake the island, Haitian fighters defeat the French troops. In 1804, Haiti declared its independence. Acuérdense que Haití era una colonia francesa, así que Napoleón envió sus tropas para tratar de controlarlo, pero no tuvieron éxito. Acuérdense que también en Europa habían varios otras potencias que controlaban ciertos países acá en América. Bueno, España, Portugal, Holanda tenían ciertas colonias acá en América, Francia, Inglaterra. Okay. So now let's move on to the South American Revolution. Said the Spanish government had adopted a more liberal constitution in 1812, but it still denied colonists representation in the Spanish government and maintained rigid control over the colonies. Latin American colonists were angry at their continual lack of political and economic power. Now over here in this map, it shows you the year where these countries, look, United States, Mexico was, United States, they took over all this area here. Sorry, this area, all this area, California, Las Vegas, Arizona, todo eso le pertenecía a México. Pero después la independencia de los Estados Unidos, ellos controlaron esto. Se ganaron todo este pedacito. Todo este pedacito. Y eso le pertenecía a los mexicanos. Por eso es que hay muchos latinos en esta área, entre California, San Diego, toda esa Arizona. Okay, that's why. So everything, all this area belongs to Mexico, and they only took it. The United States took it for them. Okay. Now continue over here in 1823. Some countries in Central America, they got their independence. In 1804, Haiti, Colombia, the Gran Colombia, that is Venezuela and Colombia. There was one country back in those days. In 1819, Peru in 1824, Brazil in 1822, 1825, Bolivia, Chile 1818, Uruguay 1828, and Argentina 1816. Okay, so 1823 over here in Central America. And Panama in 1821, el 28 de noviembre de 1821. We got our independence from Spain, thanks to Simón Bolívar, this guy. The revolutionary leader, Simón Bolívar, and José San Martín, who was Argentinian leader, led the independence movement across the continent. Simón Bolívar eventually served as a president of several nations in Latin America. One by one, the colonies threw off European rule. Neither Spain nor Portugal could hold on their new war empire. By 1831, a dozen of Latin American nations had won their freedom, their independence. Now let's talk a little bit about Mexico over here, Mexican independence. It says in 1810, the Father Miguel Hidalgo, a priest who served a poor Mexican parish in Dolores. Dolores is a place donde estaba la parroquia, una parroquia en México, called his parish to pray by ringing the bell atop of the church. Instead of leading up peoples in prayer, Hidalgo issued what came to be known as El Grito de Dolores. Something like what happened here in La Villa de los Santos, La Grito de Independencia. So the same thing happened there in Hidalgo in 1810. It was moved by Miguel Hidalgo. Sorry, in Dolores, that's the place. Hidalgo argued the people of this parish to fight for rights and for economic justice for the poor. He demanded racial equality and the redistribution of land to the poor in Mexico. Hidalgo was eventually caught and executed for his rebellions and his radical ideas about the poor. Now, another priest, Jose Morelos, took up the cause for Mexico independence. Over here, there's a picture. Shows you. It says this is Hidalgo. No, this is Hidalgo and this is Morelos. Hidalgo, Father Hidalgo, the priest Hidalgo, and Morelos. Morelos led many followers in the fight for 4 years until he also was caught and executed in 1815. So in 1821, Mexico finally gained its independence from Spain. Now, after all the countries got their independence, they needed to create a constitution, and they used some previous document that was already done in France and in United States. So they adopted the Constitution of the United States as a base in order to create our own constitution here in Latin America. It says the first Latin American constitution enacted in Chile and Venezuela. Over there in those countries where the place were created the first constitution here in Latin America, a set of representative governments that guarantee the rights and liberties of citizens. This first constitution did not sufficiently separate the power of government. Remember, like it says Montesquieu, he says like the government should be divided in three parts: the parliament, the presidential party, and the justice party. Okay, so So they think the way they did it, it wasn't very effective. It was a little bit weak, like it says over here. Okay. Now, as a finish, as ending of this chapter, I had another video that talks about our Latin American leader who was Mr. Simon Bolivar. So let's watch this video that talks about his life.
Bogotá, Colombia. Cairo, Egypt. New York, New York. 3 different cities on 3 separate continents. Yet all 3 pay homage to Simón Bolívar, a military and political leader who helped Latin America gain its independence from Spain in the early 19th century. In 1783, Simón Bolívar was born in Caracas, Venezuela, a colony of Spain. He belonged to a social class known as Creoles, wealthy Latin Americans of European descent who owned ranches, mines, and businesses in South America. Bolívar's family owned several gold and copper mines. After the death of his parents, Bolívar moved to Spain and completed his formal education in Europe. It was there that he was first exposed to the Enlightenment ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity, and the concept of representative government that had been forged in the wake of the American and French revolutions. Bolívar longed to liberate his people from Spanish control and bring a representative government to Venezuela. He also sought to abolish slavery, calling it the daughter of darkness. In 1808, after Napoleon Bonaparte named his brother Joseph the King of Spain and all of its colonies, Bolívar joined the fight for Venezuelan independence. The First Republic of Venezuela was established after an uprising in 1810, but it was toppled by Spanish forces in 1812. Bolívar restored the Venezuelan Republic in 1813 after several military engagements known as the Admirable Campaign. During the campaign, Bolívar, in a bold maneuver, led his troops over the Andes Mountains to surprise Spanish forces in Bogotá. After a series of victories, his people proclaimed him El Libertador, or the Liberator. Bolívar continued to sweep through Latin America, securing an essential alliance with the Argentinian general José de San Martín. Together, they liberated Peru. In 1825, the Congress of Upper Peru created the Republic of Bolivia to honor Bolívar. In a speech called the Angostura Address, Bolívar said, "The most perfect system of government is that which results in the greatest possible measure of happiness and the maximum of social security and political stability." Bolívar helped create Gran Colombia, a federation that is now the countries of Colombia, Venezuela, Panama, and Ecuador. Although the federation would ultimately fail, Bolívar acknowledged his people's successful fight for independence, telling them, "Those who served the revolution have plowed the sea." The countries that had formed Gran Colombia went on to govern themselves independently. Simón Bolívar died in 1830. To this day, he stands as a source of inspiration in Latin America and throughout the world for his dedication to the Enlightenment ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity.
Okay guys, with this video, we conclude this chapter about the spread of revolutionary ideals. Remember, you need to complete vocabulary like it says over here, as in page 638, and also the assessments like it says over here on page 642, and these are the questions that you need to complete. Question 1A, B, C, question 2A, B, and question 3A and B. That's it, guys. Do you have any questions? Questions? Yes, go ahead, Asensio. You don't have any question. I thought you had. Okay, guys, if you don't have any question, then see you next week. Okay? Have a nice week. Bye-bye. Take care. See ya.